So just start again. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Monday night live Q&A session. Trust you can hear us now. We did have the sound down a little bit earlier, so we got the message that no sound. Hopefully everybody can hear us now. So we'll just repeat again. Good evening, welcome. I hope everybody's fine and managing to steer their way safely through these strange times. My name's Sam Donaghy. I'm one of the technical helpline team. I'm joined tonight by Dean Kinsella. Dean's one of our area engineers. Good evening, Dean.
Good evening, Sam. Nice to see you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Glad to be back on board again. Good night.
Okay, so hopefully you can all hear us now. We're getting some thumbs up, and that's better and all good. So pleased about that. We'll make a start with the question that we had to the helpline that we pushed out through social media, and the question was, can I put a 230 volt AC fan in zone 1 of a domestic bathroom? So what are your initial thoughts on that, Dean? Can we have a 230 volt fan in zone 1?
Yes, we can, Sam. Obviously, not everything is plain and simple and black and white. There's obviously compliance to consider as well. But yeah, section 701 does list ventilation equipment as part of the current use equipment that can be installed in zone 1 of a bathroom. There are obviously additional requirements that we do need to consider. The IP rating, minimum of IPX4 within zone 1, and if there is a likelihood of cleaning and jet, then minimum of IPX5 for cleaning purposes. Obviously, we also need to consider manufacturer's instructions as well, to ensure that the equipment in question is suitable for zone 1. So it's always good to make contact with themselves or have a look at any material that is provided with the ventilation equipment. So yes.
Yeah, so
anything you can add?
No, that's it. There's a small list, isn't there, of permitted current using equipment which we can have in zone 1, which doesn't need to be extra low voltage. And as you rightly say, ventilation falls into that, providing we tick those other two boxes, which are the right IP rating and the manufacturer confirms that it's suitable for that zone 1 environment. So following on from that, another question we often get asked about bathroom fans is, does a bathroom fan have to have a local isolator? So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's what you have to consider is with regards to the purpose of the local isolation. So in order to achieve what's being asked, you've got to look at the fan itself and consider any dangers that may arise from the use of the fan for the person within that area of the bathroom, for example. So considering the fact that all sort of isolation needs to be suitably placed within the area, you've got to consider the moving parts of a fan and any danger that may arise from the moving parts. So first of all, consider the location of the fan within the bathroom and if there's any danger that arises from it. So with regards to the localization, what you've got to consider is it needed to prevent or remove the danger? Now, if there is a clear and present danger, then obviously localization would be required. But if there's no clear and present danger from persons within the bathroom using the fan, then no, it does not need to be local, but it does need to be isolation present somewhere which can be easily accessible for the person to switch off if necessary, I suppose.
Yeah, so it's you know, one of our fundamental principles is that every item of equipment has to have a means of isolation, but there's nothing specifically that says it needs to be local. So it is based around that interpretation of suitably placed. You've really got to consider the potential risks. If there are no potential risks, because for example it's placed up out of reach where people aren't going to suffer the hazards of entanglement and entrapment, then you could live with a remote isolator. If perhaps it's low down and we have got hazards created due to its location, then you might want to think about a local means of isolation, because that's what we interpret by that phrase suitably placed. It's risk based on its location. But yeah, common question, because a lot of people choose to fit them, not a problem with that, but in some instances they won't actually be a regulatory requirement.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to consider, Sam, obviously is if, depending on the purpose of the isolation, if you're going to have it remote, then it needs to be able to be locked off, where the person who is in charge, so to speak, of isolating the fan is not going to put themselves in any danger at the time that they're working on near the fan if the isolator is remote from the location itself.
Yeah.
So that's someone else to consider. No,
it's a really good point. If it's not local, so you can't visually marry it up with the fan, then yeah, it should be some additional labelling to make it clear what it does isolate. And then also you've got to consider you don't want it to be inadvertently switched back on. So if you were using a breaker in the board, for example, because that's acceptable, then you would need to consider a method of being able to lock that breaker off, so that while you're doing your maintenance or your remedial work on the fan, somebody walking past the consumer unit doesn't inadvertently energize the circuit. So again, when it's remote, we've got to consider a lock-off device of some sort to prevent that inadvertent operation. One more before we start taking them from the chat. Where can people get information about disconnection times for time delayed RCDs? So often S-type. So these are our RCDs that have got a time delay. Where can people find out information about their disconnection times?
Good old BS7671 would be a good starting point. You'd be looking in Appendix 3. The table would be 3A. I believe it's page 363. You'll be able to find further information within that part of BS7671 to give you the disconnection times that you are looking for.
Yeah. So they're there. You can always go manufacturer's instructions, because they might actually have better disconnection times. But yeah, the minimum they must meet to meet the relevant product standard is in table 3A, and it actually works out that they're for 100 milliamp, 300 milliamp and 500 milliamp, they're all given the same band. So times 1 they're all the same, times 2 they're all the same, times 5 they're all the same. But yeah, it's a tucked away little table that's towards the front of Appendix A, but that will give you the information. Okay, if we start to have a look at some of the questions that have come in through the chat room. So the first one that I can see is a 3-phase board in domestic premises. Has just one 3-phase RCD for about 50 MCBs. Big house. It's a new installation. Is this any problem? Well, I guess the first thing that would spring to my mind would be about our requirements for division of installation. So normally we would try and ensure that we divide the installation to minimise the inconvenience of a single fault. So that would be my concern. It doesn't actually say that it's an upfront RCD, but I'm guessing on the basis that it's a 3-phase RCD, it might be being used on the supply. It doesn't say whether it's a TT installation and therefore might require it, depending upon how the cable. So a little bit more information might help us. But yeah, my first thoughts would be, if it's acting as a single point of failure, i.e. you take out that RCD, you lose everything, then I think we'd have to look at the requirements around section 314 about division of installation. So 3-phase board with just one 3-phase RCD. Any other thoughts on that, Dean?
The only thing I can think of, Sam, is depending on what type of RCD it is as well, depending on the installation, if it's a Type A or a Type AC RCD, well, that's going to be a suitable type of RCD for installation, given if there's any DC current using equipment within that installation, it may have an adverse effect on the operating time of the device in question. Yeah,
very true. So a little bit more information there might help us. If we've got time, we'll come back to that. But yeah, initial thoughts would be around, have we really got division of installation? And as you rightly say, is it the right RCD? Because if it's the only one, you're going to possibly need additional protection, so it will want to be 30 milliamp, and then depending upon the type of installation and loads, have we got the right type, as in AC, AB? So yeah, a little bit more would help us on that to see whether we've got any concerns. Okay, moving on. Another one that's come into the chat room is there's an old aluminium cables. Are you able to come off them with copper, or do you have to run in a new circuit? So I think this might be the dissimilar metals issue. If we're talking about joining copper with aluminium cables, and then you've also got to factor in the material that you've used for your connection point. That would be the consideration there. Are you thinking along the same lines, Dean?
I am, yeah. Generally, the dissimilation between the two different materials, what problems may occur from that particular joint of connection from the old aluminium cables to possibly the new copper conductor cables.
Yeah. So that's basically a chemical effect, which can then obviously have an impact on the resistance associated with the connection point. So yeah, it's you really get some good advice from the cable manufacturers there in terms of the best method for jointing those. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other questions. So if you have a high PFC, prospective fault current, or prospective short circuit reading at the origin of a domestic installation, for example one that exceeds the 6 Ka of MCBs, what code would you give? Okay, one of the things is it was highlighted in the 18th in that standard domestic consumer units as an assembly are actually rated to 16 Ka, and that's an intentional requirement of the manufacturers, because that's a typical maximum associated with DNO networks. So the fact that it is higher than 6 Ka wouldn't be of concern, so long as we have got a standard manufactured consumer unit built to the right standard. 603, or standard escapes me at the minute, but if you get the correct standard, you'll find that the manufacturer's rating for the assembly is 6 Ka. So 16 Ka. So providing our prospective fault currents don't exceed those, we shouldn't have a problem with a standard consumer unit. So in which case then it would be no code at all. because although it may do damage to the breaker, it's not going to create a hazardous situation to the users of the installation. Happy with that, Dean?
Yes, yeah. Obviously, there's a bit more information in Guidance Note 3, Chapter 2 that the IET provides. If anybody wants to look at further information in regards to fault currents up to 16 kA, it does mention what you've mentioned in that as well, Sam. So nothing else to mention on that one. Yeah.
Okay. Let's just have a look. We've got one that's, I think, in a few parts. So plastic fuse board, no thermal or other damage, all circuits RCD protected and no other issues. Being mounted under a wooden stairway. Is this a C3, which is how I'd code it, or a C2? If the wooden stairs are the most appropriate fire escape route. So plastic consumer unit under a wooden staircase. I think we're saying everything else is okay with the consumer unit, you know, fit for purpose, but it's just old in that it's of plastic or combustible material. So what's the guidance there when it's under a wooden staircase, Dean?
Yeah, C3, Sam. If you're looking towards Best Practice Guide 4 Issue 5, where you've got your coding and observations in there, it is quite clear in regards to plastic fuse boards, you know, regardless of any other observations, just solely on the material itself and the location where it affects the sole means of escape route, i.e. a wooden staircase, would warrant a C3. What things you have to consider, I suppose, is if there's any fire rating boards that might be present to the undercarriage of the staircase, and any fire rating panelling or doors that might be around the understair cupboard. But to be fair, from an electrical point of view, unless you've got experience and knowledge in what type of fire rating board or doors are present, then you can't make that assumption that it is up to standard. So you'd stick with the C3 unless you can find more information.
Yeah. Another one from the chat room. Not sure, this might have a second part, which it would be interesting to know. So is there a need to sleeve a switch line that is already brown to make it easier to recognise which is which? No, there's no requirement. There's a requirement to ensure that conductors are readily identifiable at their point of connection. But if the conductor's already got brown insulation, there's no need to put a further brown sleeve on it. Obviously, you know, when we're using twin and earth and we've got switching involved, so we've got a permanent live and a switch live, we sleeve the blue with brown to make it clear that it is actually a line conductor, a switch line conductor normally. But yeah, there's no need to brown sleeve an existing brown wire. Can you think of any reason why you might do that, Dean?
Not off the top of my head, Sam. I was even trying to think of a 400 volt system where you might have more than one phase. But generally, unless you're using single insulated cables and you want to identify them for L1, L2, L3, that would be the only thing that I think of doing really, to ensure you've got correct phase rotation and polarity is correct between each connection point. But then that would be single insulated cables as opposed to PVC.
Yeah, and if we add three phase, we'd be using either the L1, L2, L3 numerals, or we'd be using the L1, L2, L3 colours. So again, we wouldn't need to additionally brown sleeve something that was already brown. Let's have a look what else we've got in the chat room. Is it better to have a mains wired smoke alarm system in a domestic setting wired into the lighting circuit at the relevant point in the ceiling, or via a separate circuit back to the consumer unit but sharing with the lighting MCB or RCBO? Um, the recommendation within the fire alarm reg is that the smoke alarm should be fed either from a dedicated circuit or from a frequently used lighting circuit, and that's really to prevent a faulty appliance taking the supply out if it was done through a ring main or a radial socket circuit, for example. So the fact that it's on a readily used lighting circuit, it would be pretty apparent if the lighting circuit stopped working. So that's the reason for suggesting it's either on its own dedicated circuit, i.e. nothing can prevent it from being energized, or it's on a readily used lighting circuit. So again, we can see when the supply to that lighting circuit's been disconnected. There's some strong recommendations, in particular when we go into the rented property, is that when it's put on its own dedicated circuit, the people, because they perhaps want to smoke where they're not supposed to smoke, will turn it off if it's on its own dedicated circuit. So another perhaps reason might be to make sure that people don't turn it off would be to put it on the lighting circuit as well. But either are acceptable. It's really then just which one you choose is which one's better for the installation, better for the maintenance of the installation as well. Okay, let's have a look at what else we've got in the chat. So we've got one there that would appear to be a follow-on from the Wire webinar last Wednesday, which was about dead testing, if I remember. So the question on that was, on Wednesday the question of calibration came up, and you said we didn't really need to get our test instruments calibrated every year, so why do we need to provide the calibration certificate on every annual inspection? So do you want to comment on that first, Dean? Do they have to have a calibration certificate?
No. What we ask for is ongoing accuracy. So that can be done by any number of means, one of which is formal calibration. Another method might be doing recorded ongoing self-checks on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on the use of the meter in question, in which you could use a calibration card for your low ohms and your meg ohms, and then pick a designated socket within your trading address or your home address to do your air fault loop impedance and your RCD operating times. So we accept either or both. It just depends on the contractor and obviously any considerations to the clients they might be working for. I know a lot of councils and HAs and main contractors do prefer to see a formal calibration certificate. However, doing monthly self-checks will identify if there are any problems with the unit as you're going through the year, as opposed to them being identified at the end of the 12-month period.
Yeah, I think that's the big advantage of ongoing accuracy checks, isn't it? If you rely on annual or in some instances biannual calibration, you can go a whole year or 2 years before you realise that your meter's actually not accurate anymore or gone outside calibration range. So the real advantages of doing those regular checks is that you'll catch it quicker, which means that you'll have less of a problem if a problem does occur. So yeah, I mean, you've also got to consider manufacturer's instructions. So some will recommend that they're done annually, and then you've got to look at whether you want to follow that in terms of whether it has any bearing on things like warranty, etc. But yeah, we don't insist on it, but we do want a recognised method of accuracy being maintained. We've got a little bit more information about the single three-phase RCD. It's a well, we've got conflicting information now. I'm not sure. It's that the gentleman has said it's a three-phase 63 amp RCD, operating time 30 milliseconds. Unfortunately, you can't see from the picture what type, and it's TNCS power system, so it's not TT. So we don't, there's perhaps not less of a requirement for an upfront device. I just asked because regulations say consumer units should have at least 2 RCDs. Yeah, I think that's what we agreed. I don't think they specifically says you've got to have at least 2 RCDs, but it's the guidance about division of the installation to minimise the impact of a single fault. So that would be the one that really drives us there.
Yeah, I think another point to add on to that quickly, Sam, is the 30% leakage current across a 30 milliamp RCD as well, being more than 9 milliamp.
Yeah.
By the sounds of it, installation that large, I think you're going to go over.
Yeah,
that
that's a really good point. The unwanted tripping requirement that was introduced in the 18th talks about when we've got an RCD looking after multiple circuits, we should ensure that under normal operation the cumulative effect of those multiple circuits shouldn't be more than 30% of the rating of the RCD. So if we are talking about a 30 milliamp RCD, we'd be looking at a maximum threshold of 9 milliamps. And if I remember from the original question, we've got 50 circuits. It's going to be very unlikely. Be interesting. I don't think the contractor who's put the questions in installed this. He's obviously been the one that's come across it for some reason. So a bit of investigation required there, I think. What else have we got in there?
I think that must be a costing situation by the sounds of it. 1 RCD for 50 circuits.
Yes, it could. It could be one of those ones that's grown and grown and grown. So it perhaps started off with much small, but yeah, I think we've got a dependency there, or a possible, certainly an inconvenience and potentially a hazard being created by that single point of failure. So yes, certainly look around 314. But as Dean rightly pointed out, also look at the requirement in the 18th now about unwanted tripping associated with RCDs. Let's have a look. We've got another one here. Visited to do an EICR the other day, and the house had a small pole sticking above the roof and earth tape all the way down gable into the ground. Looks like lightning protection. Should this be bonded to the MET? System appears to be TNCS split phase via overhead line. Yes, if it is a lightning protection system, then that's seen as an extraneous conductive part, because obviously it's there to protect against direct lightning strikes. But when there's a lightning strike, that could result in flashover into the installation. So yes, lightning protection systems have to be bonded to the MET. You need some guidance from your lightning protection engineer about locations and sizes, but yes, it definitely has to be bonded to the MET. Let's have a look what else we've got. What about, we've got some terminology issues. So RCDs, RCBOs and RCCBs. It's one of those ones where I think there is a terminology issue, and it's kind of, we sometimes misuse terms. So the one that I think we'd all agree, RCBO is a residual current device that's got integral overcurrent protection. So you can almost think of it like an RCD and an MCB combined. So that's an RCBO. RCCBs are residual current devices without integral overcurrent protection. So these are the ones where we need an additional overcurrent protective device, a fuse or a breaker, to provide us that total protection. Because strictly speaking, an RCD covers both. So an RCD could be an RCBO, it could also be an RCCB, and I think these are one of those instances where we perhaps misuse the terminology. We talk about RCDs when really we mean RCCBs, because RCDs cover both. So it's just a terminology issue, and perhaps something that we could get a bit better in doing. Although, having said that, I think everybody understands when you say RCD, most of the time you're actually excluding RCBOs. But strictly speaking, going by the true definitions, an RCD covers both RCBOs and RCCBs.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Sam, the important thing from an installation and a design point of view is to ensure that you're not mistaking the device that you've got for something that is something that you need instead. For example, an RCCB doesn't provide overcurrent protection, whereas you might be needing an RCBO device instead. So it's always important to have a look for the BSCM number on the device to determine, just because it says it's a 40 amp RCD, doesn't mean it's providing overcurrent protection for 40 amp. It just means it'll take the 40 amps without any damage being caused to it. So it's important to check it is the right BSCM number. 61008 for your RCCBs and 61009 for your RCBOs.
Yeah, because the classic is, if it truly is just an RCCB, so it only offers the residual current protection, it doesn't offer overcurrent, then it's not going to protect you, for example, in a short circuit situation, and it's not going to protect you in an overload. It will only protect you in an earth fault, so a live to earth or line to earth or neutral to earth. So yeah, it's one of those ones where I think we as an industry could be a bit better with the terminology that we use. Okay, last one we'll take from the chat room. I thought I saw one that tweaked my. If main bonding is inaccessible for inspection, what EICR code should we be using, C3 or C2? So what's your thoughts on that? If it's inaccessible, so we can't see it.
Yeah, as in a simplicity as what's been described, it would be a C3, because there's no access to the terminations to ensure that they are still complying. So a straight C3 there. However, there still will be further testing required to ensure that we have a low enough resistance between extraneous conductive parts, due to the fact that we cannot locate or access the connection points from the main protective bonding as well.
Yeah, spot on. So I think if we can say that we can verify through measurement that the extraneous conductive part is bonded, but we can't physically find the earth clamp, then yeah, we'd be looking at a C3, because like every other connection, there should be it should be available for future test and maintenance purposes. So providing we can verify through measurement that it is adequately bonded, we'd recommend just a C3. If through measurement we can't verify, then that's where we'd be looking at a C2. So, and that's really not just because we can't find the clamp, it's because it's not adequately bonded.
I think also, Sam, we've got to consider parallel paths as well. That might give a low enough reading to give the impression that we have got a sound protective bonding connection. whereas it might be taking that parallel path from somewhere else within the electrical installation.
Yeah, we've got to be. So if I often think of the situation where you can see a bonding cable coming back to the consumer unit. You've got a nice big fat 6mm or 10mm cable coming back, but you can't find the bond, and by disconnecting the cable at the earth bar and then measuring from the disconnected end to the pipework, you can prove that it's that cable. But as you say, you've got to be aware of there may be parallel paths typically caused by CPCs to the same things, which can give you like a fortuitous path. So yeah, you've got to do a fair bit of investigation to confirm that it is adequately bonded. But if you can confirm it, then access or lack of access to the bond would just be considered a C3. Okay, well we've run past our time again. I'm always amazed that these half hours are the quickest half hours in my life. I think on a Monday night, it always goes tremendously quickly. We'd like to thank you all for your patience when we had the sound issues at the beginning. I've got to admit, totally my fault. I just had the sound turned off. So thanks for shouting that out at the beginning. Otherwise, I'd have probably gone half an hour with the sound down. So thanks for letting me know. I hope we answered your questions. We tried to answer as many as we can. We'll be back again next Monday night, and hopefully see you again. There's no webinar this Wednesday, but there is one next week. That will be on Wednesday the 10th, and I believe it's a coding clinic. I would need to check that, but you can go on the website to have a look. Thanks for your time. Any last thoughts, Dean?
No, just thank you, ladies and gentlemen, again for taking time out this evening to hopefully enjoy the live Q&A. Keep the questions coming in, and spread the word. We look forward to hearing from you, and look forward to seeing you next week. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you. Thank you too, Sam.
Okay, thanks very much.